The first king named in this extraordinary record was Alulim, who ruled from the primordial city of Eridu for exactly 28,800 years. This figure isn't random speculation, but represents 8 perfect cycles of 3,600 years, a unit the Sumerians called a sar. The mathematical precision suggests these weren't symbolic numbers pulled from thin air, but calculated measurements using a standardized chronological system. After Alulim's impossibly long reign ended, power passed to his successor Alalgar, who maintained control for an even longer period of 36,000 years. This represents 10 complete sar cycles, again demonstrating the mathematical sophistication underlying these astronomical figures. The pattern continues through each subsequent ruler, with reign lengths that consistently align with Sumerian cosmic mathematics rather than random mythological exaggeration. The document's clinical approach to recording these vast timespans becomes even more intriguing when we consider that the same scribes who inscribed these numbers also documented historically verifiable rulers from later periods. After describing the impossibly long reigns of the antidiluvian kings, the list abruptly shifts to recording much shorter, more believable reign lengths for subsequent dynasties. This transition occurs immediately after a single devastating line that reads simply, "Then the flood swept over." This brief statement marks one of history's most significant chronological boundaries. Everything before this moment involved rulers with godlike lifespans, governing stable civilizations across geological timescales. Everything after describes kings with recognizably human reign lengths, ruling societies that match our archaeological understanding of early Mesopotamian city-states. The most compelling aspect of this ancient document isn't just the extraordinary numbers it contains, but the matter-of-fact way it presents them. There's no poetic flourish, no mythological embellishment, no indication that the scribes considered the antediluvian period any less historical than the later dynasties. They treat a king who ruled for 43,200 years with the same bureaucratic precision as one who ruled for 43 years. This creates an inescapable logical paradox for modern historians. The latter portion of the King List includes rulers like Gilgamesh, whose historical existence has been confirmed through archaeological evidence and independent textual sources. His epic adventures were clearly based on the life of a real monarch who ruled the city of Uruk around 2700 BCE. If we accept that part of the document as legitimate historical record, how can we categorically dismiss the earlier sections as pure fantasy? The mathematical sophistication embedded in these reign lengths points towards something far more complex than simple myth-making. Each number corresponds to specific astronomical cycles that were central to Sumerian cosmology and timekeeping. The precision suggests these figures were calculated rather than invented, derived from systematic observations of celestial patterns that form the foundation of their advanced mathematical system. Contemporary scholars have struggled to explain how ancient scribes could have developed such elaborate numerical patterns without access to the astronomical knowledge and mathematical tools we associate with much later civilizations. The complexity of these calculations implies a level of scientific understanding that seems anachronistic for the supposed dawn of human literacy and record-keeping. The geographical progression described in the King List also follows logical patterns that suggest genuine historical memory rather than arbitrary mythological construction. Power transfers from the sacred city of Eridu to the industrial center of Bad Tibira, then moves through 3 additional capitals before culminating in Shuruppak, the city associated with the Great Flood narrative. Each transition appears to represent shifts in governmental focus and administrative priorities across this vast chronological span. Archaeological excavations at these ancient sites have revealed evidence of remarkably sophisticated urban planning and technological capabilities that seem advanced for their supposed historical periods. The cities mentioned in the King List weren't primitive settlements, but complex metropolitan centers with elaborate irrigation systems, monumental architecture, and evidence of international trade networks spanning vast distances. The technological achievements attributed to these early periods include advanced metallurgy, precision astronomical observations, and mathematical innovations that wouldn't be rediscovered in other civilizations for thousands of years. This pattern of sophisticated capabilities appearing suddenly without apparent developmental antecedents has puzzled archaeologists and historians for decades. Most intriguingly, similar accounts of extraordinarily long-lived rulers governing advanced civilizations before catastrophic floods appear in the foundational texts of cultures around the world. These parallel traditions suggest either unprecedented cultural diffusion in prehistoric times or shared memory of actual historical events that transcended geographical and temporal boundaries. The consistency of these global flood narratives, combined with geological evidence of massive climatic disruptions at the end of the last ice age, has led some researchers to propose that the Sumerian King List preserves authentic historical data from a lost chapter of human civilization. This interpretation would mean our current understanding of human development represents only the most recent phase of a much longer and more complex story. The evidence supporting these extraordinary claims extends far beyond a single clay artifact buried in ancient Mesopotamia. When researchers began examining other cuneiform tablets from libraries across the region, they discovered that the impossible chronology wasn't an isolated anomaly. Multiple independent sources confirmed the same basic timeline, with variations that suggested authentic historical transmission rather than coordinated fabrication. The most striking confirmation comes from fragments of similar king lists, found in completely different cities, carved by separate scribes who had no apparent contact with each other. These duplicate records show minor variations in spelling and formatting, but the core chronological framework remains identical. Such consistency across independent sources indicates these weren't creative works of fiction, but preserved historical data being copied and maintained by different administrative centers. What makes this documentary evidence even more compelling is how it integrates with astronomical data that ancient civilizations couldn't have fabricated. The mathematical relationships embedded in these rain lengths correspond precisely to celestial cycles that take sophisticated instruments to observe accurately. The Sumerians somehow possessed knowledge of planetary movements and cosmic timing that modern astronomy has only recently confirmed through advanced telescopic observations. The third king listed in this ancient chronicle was Enmenluana, whose reign of 43,200 years represents 12 perfect astronomical cycles. This figure wasn't chosen arbitrarily, but calculated according to complex celestial mathematics that required understanding of planetary orbital mechanics. The precision suggests these numbers originated from systematic astronomical observations conducted over periods that dwarf our current scientific institutions. During his vast reign from the industrial city of Bad Tabira, Enmenluana appears to have overseen a technological revolution that fundamentally transformed human civilization. Archaeological evidence from this period shows sudden advances in metallurgy, engineering, and urban planning that have no apparent developmental predecessors. Complex bronze alloys appear without the expected gradual refinement process, as if advanced techniques were introduced fully formed. The fourth ruler, Enmengalana, governed for another 28,800 years, while consolidating these technological advances into stable social institutions. His reign represents a period when scattered innovations were systematized into comprehensive cultural frameworks. The sophistication of legal codes, religious practices, and administrative procedures that emerged during this era suggests coordination by an authority with vast experience in social engineering. The mathematical precision continues with the fifth king, Dumuzid, whose 36,000-year reign has left the most intriguing archaeological traces. Unlike his predecessors who remain shadowy administrative figures, Dumuzid appears to have been remembered through elaborate ritual cycles that persisted for thousands of years after his supposed death. His story became the foundation for religious traditions that spread across multiple continents and influenced spiritual practices that continue today. The archaeological record from Dumuzid's era shows evidence of sophisticated agricultural techniques that enabled population growth on unprecedented scales. Irrigation systems of remarkable complexity appear suddenly in the archaeological record, capable of supporting dense urban populations across vast geographical areas. The engineering principles underlying these water management systems demonstrate understanding of hydraulics and geology that seems anachronistic for the supposed historical period. After Dumuzid's reign concluded, governmental authority transferred to the mysterious city of Larak under the rule of Ensipat-Zidana. This transition marks one of the most puzzling aspects of the entire chronology because Larak has never been conclusively identified by archaeologists. Despite extensive surveys across Mesopotamia, no ruins matching the descriptions of this supposedly major administrative center have been located. The absence of physical remains for such an important capital city has led to speculation about the true nature of these antediluvian governmental centers. Some researchers propose that Larak represented a different type of administrative structure, perhaps a mobile command center, or a facility designed to leave minimal archaeological traces. The 28,800-year reign of Ensipat-Zidana from this vanished city suggests a period of governance that operated according to principles fundamentally different from later territorial kingdoms. The seventh king, Enmendarana, ruled from the well-documented city of Sippar for 21,000 years. His reign represents a crucial transition period when direct communication between earthly rulers and celestial authorities was supposedly established. According to later traditions, Enmendarana was taken up to receive divine instruction before returning to implement advanced knowledge systems that would influence human development for millennia. The technological sophistication attributed to Enmendarana's reign includes developments in astronomy, mathematics, and record-keeping that provided foundations for all subsequent civilizations in the region. The precision of astronomical observations from this period rivals modern measurements, suggesting access to instruments and techniques that have no known historical precedents. These achievements appear suddenly without the gradual development patterns that characterize normal technological progress. The penultimate ruler, Ubaratutu, governed the final antediluvian period from the city of Shuruppak for 18,600 years. His reign represents the conclusion of this extraordinary era as global conditions apparently deteriorated toward the catastrophic flood event that would reset human civilization. Archaeological evidence from late antediluvian sites shows signs of increasing environmental stress and social disruption that culminated in widespread abandonment of major urban centers. The systematic nature of this governmental collapse suggests coordination rather than random deterioration. Major cities were apparently evacuated according to planned procedures, with valuable materials and knowledge carefully preserved for transmission to post-flood civilizations. This organized transition implies advance warning of the coming catastrophe and deliberate preparation for civilizational continuity across the chronological boundary. The final antediluvian king listed is Utu-Hegel, though his reign details remain fragmentary in the surviving records. What's clear is that his rule concluded with the catastrophic flood event that eliminated the antediluvian governmental system and initiated a completely different phase of human development. The mathematical precision that characterized earlier reigns gives way to much shorter, more recognizable chronological patterns that align with conventional historical understanding. The flood boundary represents more than just a natural disaster in these ancient records. It marks a fundamental transition in the nature of human governance, technology, and biological capabilities. The post-flood kings listed in the same document display lifespans and achievements that, while still impressive by modern standards, fall within the bounds of possibility for advanced human civilizations rather than the seemingly superhuman capabilities attributed to their antediluvian predecessors. This chronological transition poses profound questions about the nature of human development and the forces that have shaped our species across deep time. The systematic documentation of these impossible reigns by multiple independent sources suggests we may be missing crucial chapters from our own history, chapters that could fundamentally alter our understanding of human origins and capabilities. The preservation of this chronological data through multiple copies and cultural traditions indicates its importance to ancient civilizations that considered themselves inheritors of antediluvian knowledge and authority. These societies viewed the pre-flood period not as mythology, but as the foundational era that established all subsequent human institutions and capabilities. The implications extend beyond historical curiosity to fundamental questions about human nature and potential. If these records preserve authentic data about human achievements under different conditions, they suggest capabilities and lifespans that modern science considers impossible may have been standard in earlier eras. This possibility challenges basic assumptions about biological limitations and technological development that underpin our current understanding of human civilization. The mathematical sophistication embedded throughout these chronological records demonstrates knowledge systems that required centuries or millennia to develop, yet appear suddenly in the archaeological record without apparent antecedents. This pattern suggests either unprecedented rates of intellectual development or inheritance of knowledge from sources not currently recognized by mainstream historical research. The global distribution of similar chronological traditions across cultures with no apparent historical contact indicates either remarkable cultural diffusion in prehistoric times or shared inheritance of actual historical memory. Either possibility would require significant revision of current models of early human development and intercultural communication. The technological achievements attributed to antediluvian civilizations include innovations that wouldn't be rediscovered until much later historical periods, suggesting knowledge systems that operated according to principles different from the gradual developmental patterns we associate with normal human progress. This acceleration implies either exceptional circumstances that enabled rapid advancement or access to information sources that transcended normal human discovery processes. The systematic preservation and transmission of this chronological data across multiple cultural boundaries and historical periods demonstrates its fundamental importance to ancient societies that considered accurate historical memory essential for maintaining civilizational continuity and legitimacy. The archaeological evidence supporting these extraordinary chronological claims extends far beyond written records into physical artifacts that challenge conventional dating methods and technological assumptions. Excavations at sites associated with the antediluvian capitals have revealed construction techniques and material science applications that appear anachronistic for their supposed historical periods. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons were moved and positioned with precision that rivals modern engineering capabilities, yet accomplished using methods that remain unexplained by current archaeological theory. The metallurgical evidence presents equally puzzling anomalies that suggest technological capabilities far exceeding what conventional timelines would predict. Bronze alloys from early Mesopotamian sites display compositional sophistication that required understanding of materials, science principles not formally rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. These artifacts show no developmental progression from simpler techniques appearing suddenly in the archaeological record as fully mature technologies. Perhaps most intriguing are the astronomical alignments built into structures from this period that demonstrate precise knowledge of celestial mechanics extending far beyond what naked eye observation could provide. Temple complexes and administrative centers were oriented according to stellar positions and planetary cycles with accuracy that required sophisticated mathematical calculations and long-term observational programs spanning thousands of years. The precision of these alignments corresponds directly to the mathematical relationships embedded in the King List chronology, creating multiple independent confirmation points for the same underlying dataset. This convergence between textual records, architectural evidence, and astronomical calculations suggests systematic knowledge preservation across multiple domains of human activity, rather than isolated mythological fabrication. The biological implications of these extended lifespans present the most challenging aspect of the entire chronological framework. If taken literally, the reign lengths would require fundamental differences in human physiology and aging processes that contradict current understanding of biological limitations. Yet the mathematical precision and cross-cultural consistency of these accounts resist easy dismissal as pure fantasy or symbolic representation. Modern genetic research has identified anomalies in human DNA that suggest relatively recent modifications to our species' biological programming. Certain genetic sequences appear to have been inserted rather than evolved gradually, showing patterns more consistent with deliberate engineering than natural selection. These findings align disturbingly well with ancient accounts describing the creation and modification of human beings by advanced entities during the antediluvian period. The sudden appearance of complex language systems with no apparent developmental antecedents presents another puzzle that conventional evolutionary theory struggles to address adequately. The sophistication of early cuneiform writing suggests underlying linguistic structures that required extensive development periods, yet appear fully formed in the earliest examples without preliminary stages that gradual development would predict. Archaeological evidence from the earliest urban centers shows population concentrations and organizational complexity that required administrative systems capable of coordinating vast numbers of people across extended geographical areas. The logistics of managing such populations would have demanded communication networks, resource distribution systems, and social control mechanisms that approach the sophistication of modern governmental institutions. The technological infrastructure necessary to support these early civilizations includes water management systems, food production networks, and manufacturing capabilities that enabled population densities comparable to modern cities. The engineering principles underlying these systems demonstrate understanding of physics, chemistry, and biology that required centuries of systematic research and development to achieve. The educational institutions necessary to preserve and transmit this complex knowledge across generations would have required organizational structures and teaching methods that ensured accurate information transfer over vast time periods. The consistency of technical knowledge across multiple sites and cultural boundaries suggests standardized educational systems that maintained quality control over information preservation and dissemination. The religious and ceremonial aspects of antediluvian civilizations show remarkable consistency across different geographical regions, suggesting either extensive cultural exchange networks or shared inheritance from common sources. The complexity of these belief systems required philosophical sophistication and symbolic thinking that challenges assumptions about intellectual development in early human societies. The artistic achievements from this period display technical mastery and aesthetic sophistication that required extensive training periods and accumulated cultural knowledge spanning multiple generations. The sudden appearance of mature artistic traditions without apparent developmental predecessors suggests inheritance of established cultural frameworks rather than independent invention. The mathematical innovations attributed to antediluvian civilizations provided foundational concepts that influenced all subsequent numerical systems and geometric principles used by later cultures. The sophistication of these mathematical frameworks required abstract thinking capabilities and logical reasoning skills that enabled complex theoretical developments across multiple domains of knowledge. The medical knowledge preserved from this period includes understanding of human anatomy, surgical techniques, and pharmacological applications that wouldn't be formally rediscovered until much later historical periods. The accuracy of anatomical descriptions and effectiveness of treatment protocols suggest empirical research programs that required systematic investigation over extended time periods. The agricultural innovations developed during the antediluvian era enabled food production on scales that supported unprecedented population growth while maintaining soil fertility and ecosystem stability. The sustainability of these farming methods suggests understanding of ecological principles and biological cycles that required long-term observation and careful experimentation to develop. The transportation networks that connected antediluvian cities demonstrate engineering capabilities that enabled movement of people, goods, and information across vast distances with efficiency that rivals modern logistics systems. The coordination required to maintain these networks suggests administrative capabilities and organizational structures that approach the complexity of contemporary governmental institutions. The economic systems that supported antediluvian civilizations required sophisticated understanding of resource allocation, value exchange, and market dynamics that enabled stable prosperity across extended geographical areas and time periods. The mathematical precision required for these economic calculations suggests numerical literacy and analytical thinking skills that were widespread rather than limited to specialized elites. The military technologies attributed to this period include defensive systems and strategic capabilities that required understanding of physics, engineering, and tactical principles that enabled protection of large populations across multiple urban centers. The coordination required for effective defense suggests communication systems and command structures that could operate across vast distances and time periods. The diplomatic institutions that maintained relationships between different antediluvian kingdoms required communication protocols, negotiation procedures, and treaty enforcement mechanisms that enabled stable international relations across cultures, with potentially different languages and customs. The sophistication of these diplomatic systems suggests understanding of political science and international relations that approaches modern complexity. The legal frameworks that governed antediluvian societies demonstrate understanding of justice principles, social organization, and conflict resolution that required philosophical sophistication and practical experience accumulated over extensive periods. The consistency of legal concepts across different cultures suggests shared inheritance of fundamental principles rather than independent development. The environmental management practices employed during the antediluvian era maintained ecological stability while supporting large populations and extensive industrial activities. The success of these environmental policies suggests understanding of natural systems and ecological relationships that required systematic observation and careful experimentation over extended time periods. The succession mechanisms that maintained governmental continuity across the vast chronological spans described in the King List required institutional structures and knowledge preservation systems that could function effectively across multiple generations while maintaining consistency of policy and administrative competence. These accumulated capabilities represent a level of civilizational sophistication that challenges fundamental assumptions about human development and the relationship between technological progress and chronological time. The evidence suggests that advanced human societies may have achieved remarkable capabilities under conditions that no longer exist, leaving only fragmentary records and mysterious artifacts as testimony to their extraordinary achievements. The systematic nature of this evidence across multiple domains of human activity indicates coordinated knowledge systems rather than isolated technological anomalies, suggesting comprehensive understanding of natural principles and their practical applications that approached or exceeded current scientific capabilities in many areas. The preservation of this information through multiple cultural traditions and documentary sources demonstrates its fundamental importance to ancient societies that considered accurate historical memory essential for maintaining civilizational continuity and institutional legitimacy across the chronological boundaries that separated them from their antediluvian predecessors. The transition from antediluvian to post-flood governance represents one of history's most dramatic paradigm shifts, documented with chilling precision in the ancient records. After the catastrophic waters receded, the surviving scribes recorded a completely transformed world, where the fundamental nature of kingship itself had been permanently altered. The mathematical elegance that characterized the pre-flood chronology gives way to chaotic, abbreviated reign lengths that reflect a civilization struggling to rebuild from near-total destruction. The first post-flood ruler emerged from the devastated landscape to establish his capital in the city of Kish. His reign lasted a mere 1,200 years, an impossibly brief span compared to his antediluvian predecessors, yet still far exceeding normal human lifespans. This dramatic reduction signals more than just chronological change. It represents a fundamental alteration in the biological and perhaps metaphysical nature of human authority figures themselves. What makes this transition particularly fascinating is how the ancient scribes treated it as a documented historical phenomenon rather than symbolic mythology. They recorded the post-flood period with the same bureaucratic precision used for the earlier impossible chronologies, suggesting they viewed both eras as equally factual, despite their radically different characteristics. The consistency of documentation across this dramatic transition implies systematic record-keeping that survived the catastrophic boundary event. The archaeological evidence supporting this chronological shift appears in the physical stratigraphy of Mesopotamian excavation sites. Distinct flood layers separate earlier cultural deposits from later ones, creating clear geological boundaries that correspond precisely to the documentary timeline. These sedimentary breaks aren't gradual transitions, but sharp discontinuities that suggest sudden, catastrophic interruption of normal cultural development. Above these flood markers, the archaeological record shows signs of rapid technological regression, followed by gradual rebuilding using simplified versions of earlier innovations. Complex engineering techniques disappear from the record, replaced by cruder approximations that suggest loss of institutional knowledge and technical expertise. The sophistication that characterized pre-flood civilizations vanished almost overnight, leaving survivors to reconstruct advanced capabilities from fragmentary memories. The biological implications of this chronological transition extend beyond mere lifespans to encompass fundamental changes in human capabilities and potential. Post-flood rulers, while still achieving remarkable longevity by modern standards, displayed clear limitations that their predecessors apparently didn't face. The mathematical precision of their achievements declined. Their technological innovations became less sophisticated, and their administrative capabilities appeared constrained by factors that hadn't affected earlier dynasties. The most intriguing aspect of this transformation involves the apparent loss of direct communication with the celestial authorities who had supposedly guided antediluvian governance. Post-flood rulers relied on divination, ritual, and indirect signs rather than the immediate consultation that earlier kings had apparently enjoyed. This separation created a new form of kingship, based on interpretation rather than direct instruction, fundamentally altering the relationship between earthly authority and cosmic guidance. The gradual normalization of human lifespans continues through successive dynasties documented in the King List, creating a clear mathematical progression from the impossible to the merely extraordinary to the eventually recognizable. This systematic decline follows predictable patterns that suggest underlying biological or environmental factors rather than random mythological invention. The precision of this chronological reduction implies systematic documentation of actual observed phenomena. Contemporary rulers from this transitional period show evidence of attempting to recreate the technological achievements of their antediluvian predecessors through increasingly elaborate ritual and ceremonial procedures. These efforts suggest cultural memory of advanced capabilities that could no longer be accessed through the methods that had previously been effective. The frustration of these attempts appears in archaeological evidence showing incomplete or failed attempts to replicate earlier engineering achievements. The administrative systems developed during the post-flood period demonstrate creative adaptation to reduced capabilities and shortened lifespans. Institutional structures became more complex to compensate for the inability of individual rulers to maintain personal oversight across the extended time periods that their predecessors had managed effortlessly. Bureaucratic innovations emerged as practical solutions to biological limitations that hadn't previously constrained governmental effectiveness. The religious implications of this transition created theological problems that influenced spiritual development for millennia afterward. Post-flood societies struggled to understand why their connection to divine authority had been severed and developed increasingly elaborate ritual systems, attempting to restore the direct communication that earlier rulers had apparently enjoyed. These efforts shaped religious practices that persist in modified forms across multiple contemporary traditions. The educational challenges facing post-flood civilizations required development of new knowledge preservation methods adapted to shorter human lifespans and reduced individual capabilities. Complex information that single antediluvian rulers could have maintained through personal memory now required institutional frameworks and written records to ensure accurate transmission across generations. This necessity drove innovations in writing systems and educational institutions that became foundational for all subsequent cultural development. The economic disruptions caused by the chronological transition forced development of new resource management strategies adapted to the limitations of post-flood societies. The efficiency that characterized antediluvian resource allocation gave way to more complex systems that required extensive bureaucratic oversight and institutional coordination. These adaptations shaped economic principles that influenced trade relationships and resource distribution across the developing post-flood world. The military vulnerabilities that emerged during the transitional period required development of new defensive strategies adapted to rulers with limited lifespans and reduced individual capabilities. The personal authority that had apparently enabled antediluvian kings to maintain order across vast territories for thousands of years no longer functioned effectively, necessitating more complex military institutions and alliance systems that could provide stability despite frequent leadership transitions. The diplomatic challenges facing post-flood kingdoms involve negotiating relationships with societies that possessed fragmentary memories of antediluvian achievements but lacked the capabilities to replicate them. This created complex political dynamics where cultural prestige was based on claimed connections to lost knowledge and technologies that could no longer be effectively demonstrated or utilized. The technological recovery process involved systematic attempts to reverse engineer antediluvian achievements using the reduced capabilities available to post-flood societies. Archaeological evidence shows numerous failed experiments and partial successes that gradually rebuilt simplified versions of earlier innovations. This recovery process required institutional coordination across multiple generations, creating new forms of technical education and knowledge preservation that shaped subsequent technological development. The psychological trauma of the civilizational collapse appears to have influenced post-flood cultures in ways that persist in contemporary human behavior patterns. The sudden loss of apparently stable, long-term governmental authority created anxiety about impermanence that shaped religious, political, and social institutions designed to provide security despite the obvious fragility of human achievements. These psychological adaptations influenced cultural development across multiple domains of human activity. The linguistic changes that occurred during the transitional period suggest disruption of communication systems that had previously enabled coordination across vast geographical areas and cultural boundaries. The proliferation of distinct languages and writing systems in the post-flood era contrasts sharply with the apparent linguistic unity that had characterized antediluvian civilizations, creating communication barriers that complicated recovery efforts and cultural exchange. The artistic expressions that emerged during the post-flood period often focused on themes of loss, nostalgia, and attempts to recapture the achievements of the previous era. These cultural artifacts provide insight into how transitional societies understood their relationship to the antediluvian legacy and their struggles to maintain cultural continuity despite the dramatic changes in their circumstances and capabilities. The mathematical knowledge that survived the transition was significantly simplified compared to the sophisticated systems that had characterized antediluvian achievements. Post-flood societies preserved basic computational abilities and geometric principles, but the advanced theoretical frameworks that had enabled earlier civilizations to achieve remarkable precision in their astronomical observations and engineering projects were largely lost and had to be gradually rediscovered. The medical knowledge that persisted through the chronological boundary shows similar patterns of simplification and gradual recovery. Post-flood societies maintained basic healing techniques and anatomical understanding, but the sophisticated surgical procedures and pharmaceutical knowledge that had apparently been routine during the antediluvian era required centuries of redevelopment to approach their earlier effectiveness. The agricultural innovations that enabled post-flood societies to support growing populations were based on simplified versions of antediluvian techniques, combined with new methods developed through trial and error experimentation. The environmental management strategies that had maintained ecological stability during the earlier era had to be reconstructed through careful observation and gradual accumulation of practical experience. The transportation networks that connected post-flood cities were initially much more limited than their antediluvian predecessors, but gradually expanded as societies rebuilt their organizational capabilities and technical expertise. The coordination required to maintain these networks necessitated new forms of institutional cooperation that shaped political relationships across the developing post-flood world. The legal frameworks that governed post-flood societies attempted to preserve the justice principles that had characterized antediluvian governance while adapting them to the changed circumstances and reduced capabilities of transitional civilizations. These legal innovations created new forms of institutional authority that compensated for the absence of the long-term personal leadership that had previously provided governmental stability. The succession mechanisms that ensured governmental continuity in post-flood kingdoms required complex institutional structures designed to function effectively despite frequent leadership transitions caused by shortened lifespans. These innovations in political organization shaped the development of governmental institutions that influenced subsequent civilizations across multiple cultural traditions. The recovery process that gradually restored human civilization to levels approaching antediluvian achievements required institutional coordination across multiple generations and cultural boundaries. This collaborative effort shaped the development of international relationships and cultural exchange networks that facilitated knowledge sharing and technological innovation across the post-flood world. The documentation systems that preserved knowledge of both antediluvian achievements and post-flood recovery efforts created comprehensive historical records that enabled subsequent civilizations to understand their relationship to earlier developments and continue the rebuilding process. These record-keeping innovations shaped educational institutions and cultural traditions that maintained historical continuity across multiple chronological boundaries. The scientific methods that emerged during the recovery period combined fragmentary memories of antediluvian knowledge with systematic observation and experimentation designed to rediscover lost capabilities and develop new solutions to contemporary challenges. These methodological innovations created foundations for systematic investigation that influenced subsequent scientific development across multiple domains of human knowledge. The philosophical frameworks that developed during the transitional period attempted to understand the relationship between the antediluvian achievements and post-flood limitations, while providing meaning and guidance for societies struggling to rebuild their civilizations. These intellectual innovations shaped religious and philosophical traditions that influenced cultural development for thousands of years afterward. The preservation of antediluvian chronological records through multiple post-flood civilizations demonstrates their fundamental importance for understanding human development and the forces that have shaped our species across deep time. The consistency of this documentation across diverse cultural traditions suggests shared inheritance of crucial historical information that transcends geographical and temporal boundaries. information that transcends geographical and temporal boundaries. The systematic preservation of these impossible chronologies across multiple ancient civilizations creates a puzzle that transcends simple cultural borrowing or mythological invention. When we examine the broader context of global flood traditions and their consistent association with dramatically shortened human lifespans, a pattern emerges that suggests these accounts may preserve authentic memories of actual historical events rather than imaginative storytelling. The mathematical relationships embedded within these chronological records demonstrate knowledge of astronomical cycles and cosmic timing that required sophisticated observational capabilities extending across multiple millennia. The precision of these calculations implies systematic scientific programs that maintained accurate measurements over periods that dwarf our modern institutional frameworks. This level of mathematical sophistication, appearing suddenly in the archaeological record without apparent developmental antecedents, challenges conventional models of gradual human intellectual advancement. The technological artifacts associated with sites mentioned in the King List display engineering capabilities that approach or exceed modern standards in specific areas while utilizing completely different methodological approaches. Stone-cutting techniques demonstrate precision that rivals laser technology, yet accomplished through methods that remain unexplained by current archaeological theory. Metallurgical analysis reveals alloy compositions that required understanding of materials, science principles, not formally rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. The biological implications of these extended lifespans present perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire chronological framework. If interpreted literally, the reign lengths would require fundamental differences in human physiology that contradict current understanding of aging processes and cellular limitation. Yet the mathematical precision and cross-cultural consistency of these accounts resist easy dismissal as symbolic representation or mythological exaggeration. The Sumerian King List stands as one of archaeology's most enigmatic documents, challenging everything we thought we knew about the origins of human civilization. These 10 rulers, who collectively governed for 241,200 years, represent either the greatest mystery in human history or evidence of a forgotten chapter that predates our understanding of the past. Whether viewed as literal historical record, symbolic representation of cosmic cycles, or preserved memory of technologically advanced predecessors, this ancient clay prism forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the true age and nature of human development. The mathematical precision, archaeological anomalies, and global flood traditions all point toward possibilities that mainstream academia has yet to fully address. Perhaps our species carries within its collective memory the echoes of an age when time moved differently, when rulers possessed capabilities that seem impossible today, and when the boundaries between myth and history were far more blurred than we dare to admit.